there, and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In this week's episode, I welcome a very special guest, Jennifer Rose Asher, to the podcast, and she joins me from her home in Dallas, Texas. Jennifer shares her story of becoming a mother. She details everything from her decision to have a child through 2 miscarriages and a whirlwind trip to Vietnam looking for her daughter. Along the way, Jennifer and her husband tried multiple approaches looking for their child and, in the end, would never have predicted where they found her. Jennifer has just authored a book on her journey of becoming a mom, and her book is called Journey to My Daughter. The book will be released in December of 2021, and I have been privileged to have a peek into the book, and I can tell you it's highly, highly recommended. If you are in the process of adopting or thinking about adopting a child into your family, then this is definitely the book for you. I've known Jennifer for a short time, and she is loving, selfless, supportive, everything that you expect from a wonderful, wonderful mom. And I enjoyed our conversation on the podcast, and it was such a pleasure to have her join me. Enjoy the episode. And a special thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram and Facebook and let me know what you think of the episode. As always, stay tuned and keep listening. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for accepting my invitation to come and share your story on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the interest in my story.
Absolutely. Once I met you and we spoke about it, it just hit me. This is something that needed to be shared. It's a story that we have to tell. And I'm sure the listeners are really going to enjoy and take some value from your story. So today we're going to talk about the topic of adoption, and we're going to talk about the journey. And I think it's going to be exciting. So Jennifer, just for the listeners, before we start and jump into the topic, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from and who is Jennifer?
I live outside of Dallas, Texas, and I live here with my husband and my 3 children. 2 of my children joined us through adoption, and the third one was biological. I have 2 horses and 3 dogs, and I've just written a book, which is about how I found my oldest child, my daughter, Hillary, through adoption. It's called Journey to My Daughter, and it's a whole story that goes around where I came from and going through kind of some infertility and miscarriage, which I wasn't originally planning to include in the book, but originally, when I originally wrote it down, it was just a story for my daughter of how we found her. But when I brought it to my editor, she said, if you're willing to talk about this, so many people want to hear about miscarriage because it's something that a lot of people aren't really willing to talk about. And yet so many women go through.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So when we talk about, the journey that led, the circumstances leading up to your decision to adopt, can you share with us what that looked like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't really ever want to have kids. And then I had this kind of life-changing moment, which was not a traumatic experience. It was a simple conversation, but somehow it became traumatic in my mind that I was going to be turning 30. And I kind of looked back on my life and said, what am I doing? I'm not really doing much. Maybe I should consider having a child. My mom had 3 children by the time she was 30. And what am I doing? That's where it started. I decided with my husband eventually to have a child. And then I had 2 miscarriages that I don't want to say they weren't traumatic because, of course, they were traumatic. I didn't experience them as trauma at the time when they happened, but I did experience them as hurdles that I had to overcome to get to my end goal, which was to be a mother.
Right. After 2 miscarriages, I mean, I imagine that you quickly decided that you needed an alternative plan. So how did you decide on adoption?
A lot of people, and since I've adopted, and this never really went through my mind before we adopted, but since we've adopted, a lot of people have asked me, well, how did you know you could love a child that wasn't biologically yours. And honestly, that didn't even occur to me. It was just, I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to raise a child. I wanted to watch a child grow. And whether that child came from my DNA or not, didn't even enter my mind really. So the first miscarriage had been extremely traumatic for me and my husband in certain ways. It was a lot to go through. It took a long time. We kind of knew from ultrasounds that it wasn't going well and that my body didn't end up, miscarrying naturally. I ended up having to have a D&C, and it was a lot to go through physically. And he didn't want to do it again. I said, no, I want to be a mother. This was a fluke. It won't happen again. And then I had a second miscarriage right after. For us, I wanted to have a child, and it wasn't even a consideration. So I never really thought about having a surrogate or anything like that. That seemed like a lot of extra steps. I just wanted to be a mother as quickly as possible. So adoption seemed like the best route for me.
Okay. So starting with adoption, I would imagine that you approached an adoption agency to help you with this process. Can you take us through what that looked like? Did you look for a baby domestically where you live, or did you also look outside of the United States?
Well, that's kind of the whole story of the book, is that I didn't want to adopt domestically. I had an idea that I didn't want to be matched to a pregnant birth mother, which is what happens when you adopt domestically. I wanted to adopt outside of the country because I felt like there was more of a need. I felt like there were more unwanted children in other countries. This happened quite a while ago, and the internet was in a very different state at that point. So it wasn't quite so simple as it probably is today. I haven't adopted, in the last 5 years, so I don't really know, but I would assume that now the whole process is a lot more streamlined, and you can just go and find adoption agencies. When 20 years ago, when I did it, it wasn't so easy. I started research. I researched different countries. I learned that there were lots of healthy baby girls in China. I decided I wanted to maybe look into that. And then I would spend hours and hours and hours on the computer at night because, again, there was no Google, or if there was, I didn't know about it. And it was just kind of searching in news groups and following threads to find the sites for adoption agencies. And then I would make a list of phone numbers to call, once it was during business hours. Eventually, we signed on with an agency, but there was a lot of research that went into it before we did that.
Okay. And so you were looking at adopting a girl from China, right? What was that process?
Yes.
And did you adopt from China?
I did not. In fact, kind of what this book ended up, it is the story of my adoption, and it very much is about that. But a lot of it is also about that I needed to kind of listen to what the universe was telling me. And I worked as an adoption counselor, helping families adopt after I adopted my two children through adoption. And then, I would tell them to make a list of priorities. And for me, absolutely, the number one priority was I wanted to be done quickly. I wanted this process to be done. I was ready to be a mother right away. And that was very inconsistent with this idea of adopting from China. And I was very bullheaded, and I was sure. I kept calling agency after agency saying, tell me about your process to China. And they would all say, oh, well, there's a minimum of a 2-year waiting list. And it's just the process takes a very long time. And I was convinced that 100% there must be another way. There must be a back door. There must be a shortcut. There must be a way that I can make this happen quicker. And it didn't matter how many agencies I called, that way wasn't illuminated to me. And I finally called one agency who had a Chinese program, but she also had a program in Vietnam. And she said, have you ever considered going to Vietnam? And I said, no, never even thought about it. I didn't even know you could go to Vietnam. This wasn't a country that kind of showed up as one of the places that a lot of people adopted from when I did my initial research. And she said, well, there's a lot of the same benefits as China, but it's a much quicker process. And I was like, aha, the back door I was looking for. And so we switched gears. and we switched gears, and I talk a lot in my book about the journey and the path, and we totally veered off the path and said, okay, forget China, we're going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And
the universe talking to you. That's the
Yeah,
universe
it was the
talking to
universe
you.
talking to me. Yeah, and the chapter in my book, it's the title is "Good Morning Vietnam." Um,
Oh, I remember that movie. It's a good one.
yes, it was like, okay, I never even thought of Vietnam, and Americans have kind of a negative connotation with even the word Vietnam. So it took a
Yes,
little
given
bit
the
to get me to
war.
consider that. Yeah, but it's funny because in Vietnam, there's not that same bias. They don't feel the same way towards Americans. And it's a beautiful country. I ended up going to visit there and trying to adopt from there. But it was that was not where I ended up. So I ended up trying to adopt from Vietnam. And kind of a spoiler alert to the book, I did not adopt from Vietnam. I ended up adopting from the United States, which was really what I was not trying to do. But
Yeah.
the whole the whole journey kind of led me in directions I never expected.
Yeah. And so how long did the entire process take? Because I'm hearing you say you're calling the agencies and they're saying there's a 2-year waiting list. Vietnam is saying, okay, this is a bit faster. From the time that you started your research to the point of adoption, how long did that take?
Remarkably, it was 6 months. And
Wow.
so much happened in that 6 months you wouldn't believe. We began this in November of 2000, and my daughter was born May 24th of 2001, and we got her May 25th of 2001.
Amazing.
So, and in the meantime, I did paperwork to adopt from Vietnam, China, Russia, Cambodia, and Kazakhstan. And I went all the way to Vietnam. So much happened in that 5 months. It was absolutely unbelievable.
So, how long did you stay when you visited Vietnam? And did you go to orphanages and meet some of the kids? Did you form any kind of bond with potential children that you could adopt?
Yeah, the trip to Vietnam was a whirlwind. The way adoption works, at least when I did it, the international adoption, you had to compile all this paperwork, and it was just piles and piles of paperwork that usually took months and months to compile. I did it very quickly because I was very driven. And then there was a lot of things that were out of your control. You had to send it to the embassy to be translated and authenticated, and then they sent it back. And the thing about Vietnam was it wasn't a very streamlined process. There were different every province in the same way that the United States, I don't know if you know this, but every state has different adoption laws in the United States. In
Yes.
Vietnam, every province has different adoption laws, which is very different from China. In China, which is why there was no back door. It's all the same process, no matter where the baby is, doesn't matter. So in Vietnam, it was very different. And after I had gotten all my dossier, which is all my paperwork done, we had planned on going to a specific province that you only had to go once. I had to work around my husband's work schedule, and he was only able to go once. And it was supposed to be for a week. Now, I got a call from my adoption agency saying they'd gotten all my paperwork, they got it back from the embassy, and would we be able to go twice? And I said, oh, we really can't. My husband can't take off of work. And they said, that's fine, no problem. You can go by yourself on the first trip. And I was like, what? Go by myself? I wouldn't go. I lived in Chicago. I wouldn't go to Milwaukee, which was an hour and a half away. I would not go to Milwaukee by myself. And they said, it's no problem. You can go by yourself on the first trip, and then you and your husband can go back the second time to get the baby. And I was like, well, I guess if that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do. So I,
Yeah, it wasn't
put
even
on
a
my big girl
decision.
panties,
I was going to
put
say,
on my big girl panties and figured out
yes,
I was
you're
going
going
to
to
go
make
to
it work.
Vietnam by myself. and and I got there, and so I'm like, little girl in the big city, like never been out of the country really. And here I am in Vietnam, a third world country, by myself. And I get there, and the facilitator is supposed to pick me up, and there's no facilitator. And I have to figure out how to get myself to the hotel. And ended up finding a shuttle for the hotel. But everything went wrong once I got there. I was supposed to be there for a week. I ended up being there for a total of, I think, 4 days. But I did go to the orphanage. And I mean, the original baby I was supposed to go for, her name was Viet. I got there, and the night that I got there, I found out Viet had hepatitis B, and was not going to be able to be adopted to the United States. And then they tried to give me a different baby. And so I was going to get this different baby. And then the embassy wouldn't authenticate my paperwork because the baby's name was changed. And then it's a crazy story. Everything went wrong, but I ended up forcing my way. And eventually they said, okay, well, we've got this new orphanage that we just started working with. And they took me to this orphanage, which was in a province called Thanh Nguyen. And it was in the northern part of Vietnam, like 4 hours north of Hanoi, which is where we were. And we traveled in this van up to this orphanage in this tiny rural town. And the roads kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, where it was barely even a path by the time we got there.
Wow.
And I met this baby that I fell in love with. And they had said, okay, there's these 4 babies that are available and you can, pick which one you're interested in. And I walked in and I looked in these they're little cradles, and there were 4 cradles lined up against the wall. And the 3rd cradle, I was like, oh my God, that's my child. And I looked at her and I just couldn't believe, I just saw it in her eyes, and I picked her up and it was like amazing. And I held this baby and we were able to be there for about an hour. And I wouldn't let go of the baby. I was supposed to be looking at all 4 babies, and I'm like, no, this one. I'm not letting go.
Yeah.
And then everything went wrong. We ended up we were supposed to take the babies to the doctor in Hanoi the next day. And I was supposed to meet with the caregivers and the babies the next day. And in the middle of the night, because remember, we were dealing with a 12-hour time difference. In the middle of the night, I got a call from the agency saying, oh, we're sorry. We just found out that baby's been assigned to another family. And I was like, no, you can't take my baby.
Oh, how devastating. Oh my
gosh. It was horrible. I'm like, you have sent me to Vietnam. And I'm here with this baby. And that other family is not here. And I was the one holding her yesterday. And I was the one who changed her diaper. And I'm the one who's going to take her to the doctor. You can't give her to another family.
That is heartbreaking.
And it was heartbreaking. And they said, well, we'll try and get the referral switched. But in the meantime, just go to the doctor with the 4 babies and you can be there and we'll see what we can do. And I said, all right. And then a bunch of other stuff happened and I ended up going home a day early. And then when I got home, I got another call from the agency and I said, have you gotten the referral switch? And they said, actually, we're terminating all of the adoptions in Vietnam. And I said, what do you mean you're terminating? I don't even understand. And they said, well, there's issues with the INS, and we've just decided that we're taking everyone who's in our Vietnam program and we're just transferring them to different programs. And I said, so you mean you sent me around the world to Vietnam for no reason? And they said, well, yeah, pretty much. It was crazy. It ended up being another loss for me in the same way that my miscarriages were. And I talk about in the book, like I now felt like I had just lost 3 babies. And it was almost more traumatic for me than the miscarriages, because this was a child that I actually held.
Yeah. And I mean, you made that instant connection when you saw her.
Did.
Yeah.
Now, the incredible thing, and I haven't even told you this, I found that baby. That baby ended up being adopted by a family in Canada. And we found that baby, and my daughter met her, and they consider each other sisters.
That is so beautiful. That is wonderful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's really cool. And obviously they're 4 months apart or 3 months apart in age. They're very close in age. And I'm not in close touch, but I'm in touch with her mom. And when we met for the first time, it was one of those weird things because I had located her. I was in a group called Families with Children from Vietnam. And I'd located her online through this news group. But she was a little apprehensive. She was kind of like, okay, this lady's saying she tried to adopt my baby. And so she was a little standoffish. I didn't ever talk to her on the phone or anything. We exchanged Christmas cards for years, for 14 years. And then my daughter's a competitive figure skater, and we happened to have a tryout in Canada. And I said to the mom of the boy she was trying out with, I said, I only know one person in this entire country, and this is the town that she lives in, and the woman said to me, that's like 20 minutes away from here. And I said, you're kidding. And I didn't even have a phone number for them. I messaged her on Facebook and said, you're not going to believe this, but we're like 15 minutes away from you. And she said, oh my God, we have to get together. And all four of us just cried the entire night. The girls just loved each other. And when we got to the parking lot, they ran to each other across the parking lot and they wouldn't let go of each other the whole night. It was the most wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So
beautiful. Going through something like this and you have all of these, you have these disappointments. I'm listening to you describing everything that could have gone wrong, had gone wrong. How did you maintain a positive attitude while all of this was going on?
Well, I didn't always, but I tried.
Yeah.
And I didn't even really realize this till I wrote it all down in a book. And then I was working on editing the book, is that what kind of kept me going through all of it was the universe kept sending me signs that I needed to follow and that this was not the right direction. Now, I didn't always listen to those signs. And I feel like that's kind of the lesson that I've learned now in 2021 is we need to pay attention to those things. When things are falling into place and you're fighting it, you should listen to the things that are falling into a certain direction and not keep trying to hold on to, these other ideas that may be great ideas, but either they may not be the right time or they may not be the right direction. And we all have our own choices to make, and everyone can choose to make their own choices. But for things to be right and the way that they're supposed to be in the way that we're going to have the most fulfilled life, it's important to kind of listen to the signs that we get from the universe or wherever they're from, and to follow those signs.
No, I agree. The universe will nudge you in the right direction, and sometimes we are stubborn and we don't listen to those nudges, but I agree with you. We definitely should. So you've adopted your daughter domestically, you've adopted your son domestically, and tell us about the experience of having your third child, because that came as a surprise. You've now had 2 successful adoptions and a little surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this was just another incidence of needing to kind of go with the flow and follow the universe. Again, I told you I didn't originally want to have kids, and then we finally convinced my husband we would have one, and we got my Hillary, and then she convinced us. She said she really, really wanted a sibling, and we were like, well, we just can't raise an only child who really wants a sibling, so we decided to have another one. I had a bunch more miscarriages. We adopted my son. And my daughter was a lot of work. She's 20. She's still a lot of work. But my son, when he was a baby, was, thank goodness, so easy. And so easy. And then he learned to walk. And when he learned to walk at about a year old, he turned into I always say he turned into a tornado. My house was a disaster. He would empty every drawer. He would knock everything off of every table. We had to baby food for the first time, and we were overwhelmed. We were completely overwhelmed, my husband and I. And we had a discussion one night, and we said, are we good? We have plenty of kids now, right? We're like, we have a boy and a girl. We're good. And then I found out I was pregnant, and I was like, at first I wouldn't even accept it. I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't take a pregnancy test. I'm like, I'm just going to have another miscarriage. I had all these miscarriages. There's no reason to get my hopes up. And then after a few weeks, it was kind of clear that this wasn't just going away. And eventually I went to the doctor, and then I was mad. I was like, I wanted a baby for so long, and I tried 2 different times, had multiple miscarriages. And now all of a sudden the universe is sending me this baby when I'm at the moment when I'm the most overwhelmed, going, the last thing on earth I want is a third child. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, okay, well, given your history, we want to put you on all these drugs to maintain the pregnancy. And I said, no. I said, if this baby wants to exist, he's going to have to fight for it. And he did. And my entire pregnancy, I was pretty miserable. Like I was just not happy about this whole thing. And people would come up to me and say, how are you doing? And just a typical question. I would say, I'm pregnant. How do you think I'm doing? And meanwhile, I had
blame it on the hormones.
I had 2 little kids that were 3 and 1, and I was like overwhelmed completely. But once he arrived, we were really happy to have him.
Yes. But isn't it so interesting that when we decide to give up the control of the outcome
Yeah,
of the things that we want, that the universe then brings it,
absolutely.
right? Because you were both
Exactly.
saying, that's it, we are done. We're not doing this again. We have two happy, healthy kids. Thank you,
Yeah.
universe, for our adoptive son and daughter. We good. And then it
Yep.
happened.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I know that you've told me, Jen, that you did not want to be a mom. So
Hmm.
now, I mean, you're a mom of three. What is that? What
Yes.
has that experience been like for you?
I think the best thing that I can say is I've heard, and it's a little cliche at this point, but I've heard people say it's like having your heart walking around outside your body. I mean, these kids are my life and they've taken over my life. And, in a previous life back in the 90s, I wanted to be in business and I wanted to be, a big businesswoman. And then I wanted to be a successful psychologist and have lots of clients. And then once, I had my three, it was none of that was important anymore. None of it was a priority anymore. It was just about them and what they needed. And, they've each gone through difficult times. They've each gone through major, major challenges. And, there's been different times when one or another of them has taken more of my time and energy and effort, but I would do anything for them. And I'm so thrilled with the way my life is going right now and my book and everything that's going on. And yet, if any one of the three of them needs me for anything, that'll all be put on hold because as much as I love what I'm doing, they're the priority. And it's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's funny. I told you I used to look at people who decided to have children and say, "What were you thinking? Do you not realize that this is going to take over your whole life and it's going to take all your money?" And and now I'm just so grateful that my friend Jenny made that comment to me all those years ago. That kind of shocked me into realizing that I wanted to have kids because I can't imagine my life without them.
Yeah. And Jenny reminded you that, 1 year to go and you're going to turn 30. And that was really the turning point.
Absolutely. It was, Dr. Phil talks about that, these, I don't remember the numbers, but there's like critical moments in your life and critical people in your life. And, you have to identify them. That was 100% a turning point in my life. I mean, my whole life totally changed directions in one afternoon.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm so glad that it did. And I'm so glad that I allowed myself I didn't get so stuck in being stubborn of this identity of I will never be a mother to allow myself to listen to that and to realize and to be open to that idea because uh, I can't even imagine the person that I would have been if I hadn't decided to have children.
Yeah. That's actually a very, very good point that you are making. I always say, I mean, I never had kids, but I always say I feel like there's a certain level of maturity that I never reached in my life because I never experienced that kind of unconditional love with my own children?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I never would have expected it, and I really didn't expect it. It was a tough transition to make that going that shift. And I don't know if you've read. I've gotten so into reading in this past year. Gretchen Rubin's The Four Tendencies, but she wrote this book called The Four Tendencies. She talks about the different tendencies, and I'm a rebel, and a rebel doesn't follow any rules. And as I was writing this book and editing this book, I kept seeing, myself being stubborn and hard-headed, and I don't care what the rules are, and even rules for themselves and seeing that in myself and that's all still there, but again just allowing myself to move past that at times and say, okay, you had this idea, you were going to be this rebel, you were going to force your way through this, maybe listen a little and allow for that opportunity. And that's really what I've learned from all of this, and I feel like that's the most transformational thing for me, that to just allow for the possibility. um and to see when the universe is telling you this, and sometimes it has to hit you over the head. Again, Oprah used to
Yes.
talk about when the universe tells you once,
Yeah.
listen, because the second time it's not going to be so subtle.
Yes. Yes. And eventually it's going to hit you with a brick upside the head.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. So I wanted to find out from you. I mean, I know throughout our conversation, we've been talking about your book, and I know that you wrote this book originally 15 years ago as the story for your daughter so that she could understand the process that you and your husband went through to get her and to bring her into your life, right?
Mhm.
So now you are revisiting this book
Yes.
and you're editing, and we are excited because I mean, I certainly am looking forward to the release of your book.
And it will be actually published in December of 2021 this year. Yes.
What I wanted to ask was, having written the book 15 years ago and looking at the book now and re-editing parts of it, how do you experience it now? Do you experience it differently now that you've got 2020 vision? Because when you wrote the book,
100%.
you were going through everything. But now,
Yes.
you've got that 2020 vision.
Well, and I'm so glad that I wrote it down 15 years ago, because there's so much that I would have forgotten, that I did forget until I read it again. In fact, the computer kind of ate the last 5 chapters of my book that I had to rewrite.
That is a
So,
crime.
and we couldn't. It is a crime,
It's a
but it's
crime.
so. So I'm like, it's fine. I'll just rewrite them. So I rewrote them, and then there was something I wanted to look up that I couldn't remember exactly how it happened, and I looked in my daughter's baby book, and there was an article written about our story, and I read through the article, and I was like, oh my goodness, I got this all wrong. I remembered it all wrong. So I like scrapped the 5 chapters that I had just written and I rewrote them again, because now I was reminded of all the actual facts of what happened towards the end of the process from that article. But as I've looked at it, and originally I thought this was a story about adoption. And everyone says, oh, it's a story about adoption. You want to reach out to adoptive families. But it's so much more than that. And my editor, she actually kind of chastised me, because we have an author's note that we write for the beginning of the book. And one of the goals of the author's note, one of the jobs that you're supposed to do, is identify your audience. And I said, I hope that I can help other adoptive families to be patient and to listen to the signs and to know that it'll all work out how it's supposed to. And she said, you're really limiting yourself. That's not what this book is about. This book is about making any decision and looking to the signs that the universe are giving you to make these decisions. And so it's not just for adoptive families, although I'm sure all adoptive families would love to read this story and hear this crazy things that I went through, but really for anyone who is experiencing hopelessness or being stuck or needing to make a decision or trying to figure out where they want to go with their life, or being stuck in a trauma that is kind of holding them back from what they should be doing with their lives, and being open to listening to the signs and seeing the signs that the universe is sending to kind of guide them in the right direction.
Yeah. You think you're writing one thing because you're sticking to the facts. But now in hindsight, it's
Yes.
actually, and with the experience now of being a mom and looking back, that it's a story for everyone.
Yes. It
Yeah.
really is.
So where can the
Absolutely.
listeners find you if they are interested in connecting or getting your book?
Well, my name for the book is Jennifer Rose Asher. So you can find me on social media. On it, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, under Jennifer Rose Asher. My website is the title of the book. It's journeytomydaughter.com. And that's probably the best place. You can sign up for my newsletter there. And obviously, once the book is available on Amazon, you'll be able to search for it on Amazon, or there will be a link on my website. So that's probably the best way, is my website, journeytomydaughter.com.
That is such an apt title.
It's funny because that title is the title that came to me when I started writing this, and it's never changed. And I've thought about, could I name it something else? And I can't think of anything else that it could possibly be called.
Yeah.
And especially again, as I've been revisiting this, I really tried to highlight in the book the journey that this was, that it was a physical journey, it was an emotional journey, it was a transformational journey for me, kind of on a spiritual level as well. So that word journey just encompasses all of it, and it also encompasses the process of revisiting the book and bringing it actually to publication. So the whole thing is it's just a journey, and then that word just kind of encompasses everything I've been through in the last year and through this whole process.
Yeah, fantastic. Tell me any last words of wisdom for the audience?
I think the biggest thing that I hope everyone can take away from listening to me and from reading the book, hopefully in the future, is just to be open and to be willing to consider different opportunities and not be stuck, whether it's within yourself or within, kind of the trauma you've experienced, or a situation that you feel like you don't have the option to leave. Again, whether that's self-imposed or imposed by others, or just imposed by kind of falling into a specific job or whatever, particularly, when there are very clear signs to you that maybe this isn't right, this isn't the right fit for you, to just be open to receiving those signs and hearing those signs for yourself.
That is excellent advice. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
so
Jennifer.
much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure catching up with you again. And I'm so happy that I got to meet you. And
Me too.
yeah, I think, we were divinely guided to meet, and I'm really happy about that. Thank you again for joining me today and for sharing your journey with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it as well.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.